Hello, everyone. Welcome to Timeless Voyager, where the knowledge is timeless and you are the Voyager. I am your host, Bruce Stephen Holms. So strap your cosmic seatbelts on and prepare for another amazing ride. Now, today's guest is remote viewer Josh Maitland. I'm going to let Josh do his own introduction.
My name's Josh. I'm an engineer, a musician, and an intuition teacher. Over the course of the last few years, I have been actively transforming myself into a superhero. I lost 40 pounds, got into the best shape of my life. In September 2021, I discovered a unique and super fun form of active meditation. It's called remote viewing. It was developed by an artist named Ingo Swann and scientists at the Stanford Research Institute in the USA. It was government funded, and essentially they designed it to spy on the Russians with psychic powers. Finding remote viewing kind of marked stage 2 of this superhero transformation. I had already been planning to do a Sober October challenge, just for my health. That first summer after COVID had been a bit of a party. So I figured playing with this meditation practice would be a good way to keep busy. Whenever I felt like cracking a beer, I would crack my third eye instead. What I wasn't ready for was how well this would actually work. When you do a remote viewing session, you're totally blind to the target. The meditation focuses on harvesting your inner intuitive sensory impressions. You kind of just jot down all the details in a Zen-like kind of way. It splits your left brain and right brain to pursue the things they do best. I ran about 15 sessions over the course of that initial challenge, and 13 of them had pretty strong correlated data. Not only was the fact that I could do this mind-blowing on its own, but I realized that by doing these meditations, I was actually training my intuition the same way I train my body. Sort of like an inner psychic workout. Either way, having a strong intuitive connection can, literally save your life. I've used it for lots of practical stuff too. Business, music, even to dominate the field on family game night. Because this challenge was so impactful for me, I decided to run it again in 2022. I'm inviting other people to join me this year. I've actually structured it as an online course. The end goal is just to start training to open up your intuition. You strengthen your body to be healthy and adaptable. And the goal of intuition training is effectively the same thing. When you have a strong intuition, when that kind of important information comes through, and it will, you'll have a well-tuned system for receiving and interpreting that information, those messages from the Force. If you already have a daily meditation practice, this maps onto it perfectly, and you can just kind of splice in a remote viewing session here and there in your regular practice. Even if you just have 10 minutes a day, the key of this is practicing getting into a flow state. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the challenge.
Welcome to the show, Josh.
Thanks for having me, Bruce.
Now, the question is, though, a lot of people here may not be aware of what remote viewing actually is, because this intro was good, but let's get more detailed.
Yeah.
Can you give us a real detailed idea of what this is about?
Yeah, so remote viewing is a methodology for gathering psychic information. It was developed in the 1970s at Stanford Research Institute. The main scientists involved, at least at the outset, were Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ. And they worked with Ingo Swann, who was kind of their main psychic, who was testing out these methodologies that they were developing. So it's this repeatable process that you can use to kind of get your intuitive faculties into a state of receptivity, I suppose you could say, so that you can kind of connect to non-local information about a specific target. Generally, you're completely blind to what that target is while you're doing the remote viewing session. And this repeatable methodology allows you to get that accurate information through your psychic faculties about whatever this blind target is. So it's actually a really well-designed process, just because with intuition in general, the blockage to intuition that I find most people have, myself included, is trying to get the information without being in the appropriate state of mind, of consciousness to receive that information. My opinion, I suppose, on where this information comes from is, the quantum physics, I think, is pretty much in agreement right now that everything is energy, and energy and information. So, the energy has information associated with it. So, this coffee cup is just a bunch of vibrating energy. But there's information associated with that coffee cup, such as the vibrating energy of this coffee cup is located at this specific location in space-time on my desk, and it's a ceramic, and it's blue, and so on. So, excuse me. So when you're remote viewing, I think what you're really doing is you're connecting to the energy of whatever your target is, and interpreting those vibrations, the informational, the data associated with that energy through your own energetic sensing systems. So it's
it's sounding really complicated. It's probably more complicated to talk about it.
I'm probably making it more complicated than it needs to be. But really what you're doing is there's this stepwise process in remote viewing, depending on the version you use. There's different steps. So I use a 5-stage process. Some people use a 6-stage process. But really, to simplify it, it boils down to, first of all, preparing yourself to be receptive to this information through meditation, or the cool down, as it's called. And I know you're a meditator, so I don't have to sell you on the benefits of that. But it does kind of kick off the whole thing when you get into that kind of place of calm, and the still point is really what you want to try and hit, at least initially. And then once you're kind of in that state and ready to go, you set up your page for your session with certain things. You want to write your name down, you want to write the date, just to track your information, so that when you go back to it later, it's organized, right?
Okay, so let's
when
stop
you did it.
Hold on for 1 second, because I want to this stuff so well. I just want to kind of like get a couple things together.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the first point here is that you're not transcending, because if you were transcending, you wouldn't be able to get yourself prepared to write something down.
Correct.
So, and I'm not saying that as a negative thing. I'm just saying so people understand the difference here. So you're in a high state of alertness, let's call it.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be okay with you?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same cognitive load, I would say, as taking a test or something like that. So you're in a state of focus. You're in a state of awareness where you are active in what you're doing. So you're not kind of passively letting. I mean, so it's challenging, because you're trying to passively let this right brain information come in, but at the same time, your left brain, you're actively jotting these things down as they come through without judgment. You're supposed to, for example, you start off with a connection. So you do what's called an ideogram, which is just a little scribble on the page, and it's meant to sort of cue your subconscious mind to connect to that target and retrieve that non-local information. So that little scribble is effectively a holographic representation of the target itself.
Now we know we're actually going to show many of these examples in the show. So people are going to be able to see the diagrams that you actually wrote down during a particular experience. Is that correct?
Yeah. So
okay,
we've got a few of those.
So stay tuned, folks. This is going to be a really great show. All right. So So the thing is, you're alert. You know what you're doing, okay? But I call it a high state of alertness or whatever it is. But there's a
Hmm.
high focus. And then now this is why I ask you, because when people start telling me about remote viewing, my first question when I first heard about it was, are you saying that you go to the place that you've been told to go to? Do you go there, or are you okay? So let's talk about location. Let's talk about the concept of location.
That's a fun topic, and I think there's some debate around what the mechanism is and whether you're sort of astral projecting to the site perhaps,
Good point. Very good point.
or um, I think you can do it that way. I tend to think the mechanism of it is more along the lines of that concept, within you the whole universe is folded. I presume you're familiar with that quote. I can't tell you where it came from, just kind of popped into my head,
It
but
came from the same place everything comes from.
there you go, the quantum field. So it's I think you kind of go inwards. I think it's again, within you the whole universe is contained. So if in theory, so is your target. So and Julia Mossbridge, brilliant scientist, neuroscientist, and researcher, she told me this, just as a sort of a tip about when you're remote viewing targets that are, potentially kind of spooky, like UFOs or weird stuff. That she does the session in what she calls model space, which is sort of this perfectly accurate model of the universe that resides within her, or within me, or within you, or within whoever's doing the session. We all have that connection to the source. So I tend to think that when I'm doing these sessions, I'm going within to find the target rather than going out. And again, Julia told me that that's the safer way to do it. But I think you can. I think you can do both. And it's really a matter of intention.
And that now there's a key word that I always love to underline: the word intention. It's very important for people to understand. Intention is everything.
Oh
It's
yeah,
everything. Even if a person says, I have no idea what they're talking about today, I don't think that's going to happen. But let's say they still understand intention, because if you want to go to the store, there's intention.
hmm,
Before anything else happens, you had to have an intention.
yeah,
I mean, I know that might sound silly, but it is an underlying and very important term that many times people do not get, just because someone didn't say that's what intention is. It's not mysterious.
exactly.
But it's
Yeah.
mysterious if you did not ever think of it before.
And I
All
mean,
right.
that's when you're connecting in a remote viewing session and you do your initial little scribble. Your intention with that scribble is to connect to the target. So that's intention really drives the ship here with remote viewing. And as part of that cool down process at the start where you meditate and everything, it's good to good practice to kind of create intentions as you're doing that. I intend to have a good session. I intend to gather accurate information. I intend to be in a state of flow. You can sort of you can make or break your session with intention, really. If you're foggy on your intentions going in, you're probably going to have less accuracy, or at least you introduce that potential. So
Now, there's another word I want to underline. That's a great word, foggy. So
yeah,
intention needs to be as focused. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think as possible. Is that correct?
yeah, you want to be clear on what your goals are going into a session, and it can be as simple as I think Joe McMoneagle, who's a pretty famous remote viewer. I remember hearing once that his intention was always to make his clients happy with every session that he did. So that's a pretty good intention, because it's
Yeah.
selfless, and you have a positive goal in mind to help people out. And he's one of the greatest in the game, I think, still to this day. So clearly that worked for him. So it's I mostly do sessions for myself. Like I'm a student of this as much as a teacher. You know, I'm it's a practice for me that I use for my own well-being, if as much as anything else. Just because I find that, you know, it's very similar to meditation as far as the benefits that it has, or at least I found that. Simply because you're using the same muscles. You know, you're going within, you're connecting to you know, that higher aspect of yourself that is connected to the source of all that is, however you want to say it. But yeah, I mean, the intention is to setting yourself up, and as you go through the process too, um, again, there's these different stages. So there's your initial connection, and then stage two would be where you start to gather sensory information. So you just kind of you sit in that still point, and you again, you intend by asking questions, by being curious, and say, okay, so what do I see here? What do I see at this target? And you just kind of, you know, you have your little drawing, and you're kind of poking away at your ideogram, and just seeing, okay, what do I feel? What do I feel at this point in the line? What do I feel at this point in the line? And by starting with sensory information, you start to get your high level stuff. So I always start with colors, and then I move on to sounds, and you know, physical feelings, textures. I always get a lot of good textural information. But as you go through each of your sort of physical senses, as you know, I call it sort of the inner versions of those that you're using to perceive these you know, these psychic impressions. As you go through these different senses, you kind of end up getting more and more connected to this target. And the phrase that a lot of people use is your impressions are like seeing through a glass darkly. So back to the fogginess that we mentioned. I tend to get a lot of really kind of hyper crazy visuals when I'm doing this. Um, you know, I've always had,
And look at the background.
yeah.
Background is
I had this during my whole training. I actually had this on the other wall, so it was kind of behind my screen as I was doing all this stuff. So, you know, maybe the mandala
I like
has
it
helped me.
this thing. Okay.
It makes you wonder. But yeah, I mean, I've always been a very visual learner. I've always had a great imagination, you know. And when I was a kid, I loved to draw. And eventually I got into music. So my audible impressions often are quite. One thing I get in the audio a lot of the time is snippets of songs, because I'm a musician, lifelong musician, and so for example, I was doing a session last month. I had this kind of feeling of a disturbance in the force, I guess you might say, and I decided, all right, I don't know what this is. I'm just gonna probe it. I'm gonna see what comes up. And I ended up getting a lot of data that was consistent with, you know, the horrible situation we're seeing unfold in the Middle East right now. And you know, one of the songs that came to mind was "Come Together" by the Beatles, and I
Right.
was left just from that impression with a hopeful feeling, I guess, you know, at the end of it, which is what you want. And then the other one I heard was "The World Turned Upside Down" from the musical Hamilton, which is what seems to be happening certainly at the moment that we're recording this. You know, there's a lot of chaos, but it's a remote viewing is a great practice for that. Again, like I was just kind of feeling kind of concerned, so I ran a session, and I got all this information about some kind of scary stuff. But at the end of it, I was left with, and I think again, it's because you're connecting to this kind of higher aspect of yourself and of reality. I was left feeling much more hopeful. And when these things started to transpire, I wasn't, you know, floored by it with fear and anger and emotions like that, because I'd sort of already projected forward into that and felt it out through the remote viewing session. You know, it's because, like, I think there's something to the fact that if you're sensing future information, it tends to reduce anxiety. around events when they actually come to pass. And that's been true for me. I've talked to others who would say about the same thing. But I think that's one of the biggest benefits of remote viewing that people don't necessarily talk about a lot, is just the fact that it can be the type of thing that gives you peace of mind, even if you're picking up stuff that isn't necessarily rainbows and unicorns.
All right, with
in your
that,
work.
let's get into some specific sessions that you've done, and you've got some great examples, and I know the audience is interested, and so am I. So let's see where we're going with this.
Sure.
Where would you like to start?
Well, we can start where I started. Number 6, I believe, on your list is some of the initial training that I did. So when I first found out about remote viewing, I caught this documentary called Third Eye Spies. You can still find it; it's on lots of platforms, and it gives you the kind of whole history of the SRI program, and they show some pretty cool examples similar to this, where
SRI for the listeners. SRI.
Yes, Stanford Research Institute, and that's where this was all developed originally. And eventually, it was used in the military, all kinds of different agencies of the U.S. government for 20 years, and then the program went. It was shut down. We'll just say I'm not privy to all the specifics of it, so I won't talk about it. But the information was declassified too. Right. So from 1995 or so on, people, it was in the public domain, and people were starting to figure it out. And nowadays, there's quite a few courses online and stuff that you can find about it. But when I did my initial training, I did sessions on my own local news, and I decided, okay, I'm gonna for 30 days, I'm gonna try and do as many sessions as I can, and just try to predict the photo in the top story of tomorrow's local news. Okay. And the thing with this, one thing with remote viewing is that time is completely weird in the way it works. And so in this example, I ran this session on October 9th, 2021, and I got all kinds of data about a tractor. I was pretty certain that my target was a tractor, that there was a field with, you can see all the little loops on the field in my drawing. There was some kind of cutting device or combine, and there was a building off in the distance somewhere. And so I was kind of monitoring the local news to see what would come up. It didn't always come up the next day. In this case, it came up on October 11th, so a little more than next day. But as soon as I saw this image on the news on the website, I was like, that's it. I know that's what I saw. That's the kind of way it works, is, you get all these impressions as you're in the session. And, this page 9 here that you're seeing is kind of, you break it down into components. So you start with that ideogram, and then you run through your sensory information. And then you just kind of sketch. Stage 3 is the sketching of, okay, what are the main components here? And you usually pull that from your sensory data. The last step in the sensory process that you do is something called dimensional information. So I'm sensing something man-made.
Before you go too far, I want to just make a couple of comments.
Yeah.
What's good about this, and I think people can easily see the idea, is that it's one thing to say to somebody, oh yeah, in my experience 2 days ago, I saw such and such. But what is unique about this and important is the idea that here you have your document.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I did on this day.
Signed and dated. Yeah.
I waited, and when it showed up, here it is. And so that's good. That's good for people to understand that we're not talking about, oh yeah, I was on the train going somewhere, and there's the picture of the train just before it crashed. And somebody goes, oh, you saw it, and then what? wait, I don't understand. Was it a dream? See what people, so this
Yeah.
is great. This is good for people to see, let's call it the pragmatic part of something that seems to not be pragmatic on the surface.
And that's the thing that blew my mind about this from the get-go was just this idea that I can sit for half an hour and just kind of perceive stuff and jot it down. And you start with, again, the ideogram, the sensory information, then this kind of high level dimensional sketches. But then you kind of go through that same process again, like a nesting doll almost. And for each of those components that you perceive initially, you break those down further. And then at the end of the process, in this case, it's called the site template. I generally call it the site summary. This just was the templates I was using when I was learning. And you kind of go back through your different steps, and you piece together all the different components into a cohesive picture, a cohesive summary. And so usually, if you're looking to say, okay, that was a good session, that was a hit, then your summary is going to look something like your target once the target arrives. And the other thing is too, like, at least with these types of sessions where I'm running the news and I'm trying to predict future news, as soon as I see that news story, it's like a bolt of lightning. It's like, oh, that's feedback. I know what that is. I saw that already. But yeah, it's important, I think, as far as just sort of proving this stuff, that you are jotting this stuff down and recording it in a way that is easy to follow, for other people, at least, who are aware of this method and how it works. But yeah, I essentially I think I did 15 sessions on this. And of those, I think I got 13 or so where I received feedback, and the feedback was relatively accurate. And not all of them were smash hits like this one. Like, I've got the tractor, I've got the trailer on it, I've got the building in the distance, I've got the cutting device on the back of it. I had a farmer there in this sketch, but I think now that was actually just the photographer, whoever was taking this photo. Because when you're remote viewing this photo, you're not just looking at the photo, you're going to that site, to that location, that place in time where that photo was taken. So you're going to pick up whoever the photographer was, presuming there was a photographer at that site, and it wasn't just a drone or something like that taking the picture. But that's pretty common. I get that a lot. And again, there's that debate of, are you going outward to that site, or are you going inward to that site? I don't know. Depends on your intention.
The old in-out thing. All right, so you have another one. There's quite a few here.
Yes, there's two more, I think 7 and 8, that are from that same series. So this is another one where I got all kinds of different impressions, and then a couple of days later, I'm not sure exactly when this one showed up. It was again a couple days after the session though, and this is a local park in my town that I'm very familiar with. So the impressions were really pointing me towards this park and this waterfront area. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'm getting all these pieces. There's a lighthouse. It feels like maybe there's some, the moon is in the sky and it's nighttime. I got that wrong. It looks like it's maybe kind of a sunset type of time, perhaps, instead. I got some boats and some trees, and again, the main feature here is kind of these terminal buildings that you see in the back. But yeah, again, this was one that was a pretty clear hit. I think this area, I had all the little stones on the edge. The hardest part really is putting everything in the right place. Because I'm pulling all these components out from earlier parts of the session, and as you're drawing the summary, it's always kind of like, okay, where does this go? within the frame of
Well,
reference.
now there's a really interesting point. I know this is going to get like a little farther out, but we'll just see how we do.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. When you live in an environment with three-dimensionality that everyone's used to, and you're operating in a linear time, what also happens is you end up having spatial stuff. And in the three-dimensionality, the spatial stuff is very well organized. And in the quote unquote game that we play in reality, we all agree that those things are not going to move around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, when you're outside of three-dimensionality, when you're not confined by the linear movement of time space, then it becomes apparent that those things that you think belong in particular areas, they are not. They can be anywhere.
Yeah.
This is very similar to a dream sequence in the sense that
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
when a person's dreaming, and this is what I always found interesting about dreams, you accept whatever's happening. You don't usually you don't question it. You know,
Hmm.
when you tell the dream to someone, you go, "I can't believe it. I thought this and that." But during the time that you're having the experience, you accept everything that's happening
Yeah.
without question, usually.
Yeah.
Although
Yeah.
sometimes you might say, "Wait a minute, that's not how it's supposed to be." But that's kind of in a higher developed area, like an area of witnessing a dream versus being in the dream.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
so
I
enough of
think
my stuff.
you're kind of half in that dreaming. You're in a dreamy kind of state when you're that deep into a remote viewing session that you're doing your summary, because you've been kind of in this meditative flow for about half an hour, and things are starting to kind of you're very connected to your target once you're that deep into a session. But again, you're connected to it on that energy level, right? Like you're connected to the non-local energetic representation of your target. And yeah, no, that's a good point that I hadn't thought of before, actually. That within that sort of energy dimension, the physicality is maybe not as solid as we consider it to be in our own
Absolutely.
3D. Yeah, appreciate
Um,
it.
you have another one here, that number 8 thing. Should we bring that up?
Yeah, yeah. So this is one that I didn't quite nail, um, but I did get this kind of impression that I was sort of on top of a building, and I was looking at the town from above, and so I had this impression, and we've got mountains kind of in the distance where we live, and I was like, okay, I just kind of sketched this big pointy peak of a mountain, which we actually don't have any big pointy peaks. So I'm not sure why I drew it that way, but um, essentially the symbolic, this clock tower object that you see here that's on the roof, I sort of interpreted that wrong. As I interpreted that as a mountain. But I had all these other kind of buildings below. The rest of the mountain you can kind of see zigzagging in the background there. Again, you can see those terminals that were in the previous example, just kind of over on the right. But I mean, I actually kind of got the arrangement of things correct. As far as where the mountains are versus the terminals and the other buildings and so on. But yeah, so in the front of the frame, I didn't catch that. Oh, this is actually a piece of a building. But it's pointed. Just like it ended up being in the picture.
Yeah,
Um,
the clock would have nailed it, right?
yeah. So I missed that one. I can't remember if I had some aspect of the clock. I think I actually had something about this orange Home Depot bucket too. Like the color orange popped out at me for whatever reason during this one. Um,
That's a
so
famous.
you can either nail it or you can be close. Like
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
all kinds of range to the level of accuracy you can have with this. And the
All
important
right.
thing is to look at it as training, and not to get too hung up on being right or wrong, which is hard to do. I can attest to that. I'm a perfectionist. I hate being wrong. But
Well, when you're
it's
one of the things we share is music production, and there's a certain type of person, and I'll use a great controlling person
Yep.
He gets into the studio, and then it's like everything is controlled, and the whole environment has to be a particular thing. And if you're not careful, uh, you lose the session. So that's one of
Yeah.
the interesting things about being a producer, and what you're talking about is that you have to be very careful, but at the same time, there's a balance, and where does the experience end and another experience begin? It's just all that stuff. So
Yeah. Music production is a real corollary to this. I've found the more I do it, just as far as the whole idea of taking something intangible, a song idea or a song that's in somebody else's head if you're
yeah, here we
producing
go.
for them.
An intention, which basically has no basis. This is the best one,
Yeah,
I think.
yeah. And you're
I don't want
taking
to go
that,
on a
you're
story.
taking that intention, you're trying to bring it into
Exactly.
physical reality somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
And
And so
create.
with remote viewing, you're doing that with a pen and paper. And in music production, you're doing it with instruments and recording equipment. I've actually had some interesting experiences where I've had people kind of, just screwing around, jamming, throw me a remote viewing target number. Usually your target is represented by some random number that's associated off the page, to keep you blind to the target. Um, and so my
Okay,
buddy
now
would throw me.
we have to wait. We're going to have to explain this because we can't
Sure.
let this go by too fast. So it's very important. This is a very important point because it's like in any experiment, there has to be a way to say the person did not know. Well, who knew, and how are we going to judge it? So why don't you just give a clear, but the best explanation
Yeah.
you can of the
So
numbers and
so this is called the tasking. So the tasking of a remote viewing session is where you set up what your target is actually going to be, and you assign. So say in this case, my target was my local news tomorrow, top story, photograph. That's the examples we've looked at before. That was the tasking for that. And so I knew what that tasking was. So that would be considered partial front loading in the sense that I'm like, okay, I know I'm running a news target, but you don't know what the news is going to be. It could be anything. So um, I was blind in the sense that I did not know what photograph within the news I was going to be viewing at any given time. But generally speaking, you want to be blind to your target. So certainly in the old military program, they would have people that were taskers, and they would set up the tasks, and then they would assign a number to that target, and then give only the number to the viewer. And then the viewer would take the number, and they'd go through their process, and they'd find the information. So it's any target where you have any kind of information up front is called a front-loaded target. And I mean, if you know exactly what it is, like, what's the point of even doing the session, really? But a little bit of front loading, like just category wise, like you're remote viewing something man-made, that at least gets you in the ballpark so that you're not, say you say the target was that clock, for example. And if I had known I'm looking at something man-made, maybe that would prevent me from zooming in on one of the trees and considering the tree at that site as my target. Because a lot of the time you get kind of pulled energetically to whatever the most standout element at any given site is. And what stands out to me is going to be different than what stands out to you, just based on our own psychological makeup and preferences and everything else. So I have a background in water resource engineering, and when I did these news targets, even though my tasking was to go for the top story, I found that my subconscious would often deflect to stories that it figured I would find personally
sure,
interesting.
your
So,
interests.
and anytime there was a story about the water treatment plant or that tractor example, the story was about water management practices. So I would get a lot of stuff about water and things that, and I love Halloween, so I got stories about Halloween
Yeah.
and the decorations downtown and things like that. So it's
it's such a weird and interesting process. I love it.
All right. So where would you like to go from this point?
Well, I mean, so there's also lots of practical things you can do with remote viewing, right? So you can use it, like people use it for stock markets and all kinds of crazy stuff like that, right? And they have success with it, you know.
Yeah, of course.
I don't personally, but
Well, it's like the oldest one in the book. You know, as soon as someone knows there's such a thing or believes in time travel, the first they think of is, okay, I'm going to go. I watched a film the other day where the first place the guy went was he went to the roulette wheel and made a killing.
It's funny that there's definitely some weird stuff that goes on with that, because I've obviously tried to win the lottery with this. I mean, why wouldn't you? But
Right.
you know, and I've got a whole other method I use for that. So it's hard to, most people find it hard to remote view numbers and letters with any kind of detail. You know, just the nature of intuitive information is largely symbolic. And your job as a remote viewer is to kind of parse that symbolism down into you know, sort of specific detailed information. So you know, it's a lot of people have trouble with numbers, but you know, there's ways around it. Like you can kind of use physical energy and dosing type stuff to say, okay, you know, this finger represents 0 and this finger represents 9 and everything else in between, you know, and so on. And again, with the intentionality, you kind of cue it like, okay, what's the first winning number of the pick 3? Oh, it's 8. Okay, what's the second winning number? Oh, it's 3. And you can and you play with that. And so I've done tons of those, and I am constantly getting 2 numbers out of 3, and then the third one is off by exactly 1. And and if I don't buy a ticket, I'll get it right. But if I buy a ticket, I'll be off by 1. And it's so weird. And I know probably 10 other people that I've talked to who have had the exact same thing happen to them.
Well, now what
repeatedly.
you've given a great example of what karma actually is.
You know, and I think it is something like that. I actually did a remote viewing session, again, totally blind. A friend set me on this target, and the target was, why is it that remote viewers can't seem to use their remote viewing to win the lottery? And I got all kinds of really interesting data, and a bunch of people ran this target, and I actually looked at their data too. And one thing that came through was the Pink Floyd song "Learning to Fly," which I found was interesting. And I got a whole bunch of stuff that was all about, you know, very kind of esoteric, you know, chakras and inner catalysts and, you know, reactors. Like it was a very bizarre session, but essentially I think it boils down to the idea that if you're not meant to win the lottery, you're probably not going to be able to break through it with this. If that's your reason for doing this, it's maybe not the best reason to pick up remote viewing. That being said, for some people it's true. I know people who have won. I know one guy who like funded his house with horse racing bets. And I know people who've won. I know of people who have won, you know, from anywhere from hundreds to thousands to even over $100,000 with this stuff. And people get like, lottery winners have dreams about the fact that they're going to win the lottery. There's a guy, I forget his name now. I want to say Timothy Schultz or something like that. He's got a whole YouTube channel where he interviews lottery winners about their winnings and their experience with it. And he himself was a lottery winner. And you know, everybody, I'm kind of fascinated by the idea just because I'd love to win the lottery, you know. But
all right, well, let's not sell anybody on the idea.
Yeah. Don't pick up remote viewing specifically for that purpose.
Well, here's the bottom line. Let's just like finalize this part. If you're going to win the lottery, you will, whether you're a remote viewer or not.
That's right.
And if you're not going to win the lottery, it doesn't matter if you're a remote viewer. So
that's right.
The thing is, that's basically how this stuff works. Everybody's disappointed when they hear that. That's why people love these films and stories about time travel. Because there's no part in it that says no. All right, listen. Before we don't want to run out of time here. Which one would you like to go to? We had talked about 11, but there
Yeah,
was
so sorry, we were talking about practical applications. So maybe jump to 11.
okay.
And so this was a friend of mine who was into hockey tasked me on who was going to win the draft lottery, the NHL draft lottery for 2023. And I don't know anything about hockey. I'm a bad Canadian, I guess. But
I was gonna say, that sounds like an oxymoron. How's that possible?
yeah, right.
What
I
did
mean,
you
I
say?
followed it in the 90s, but that was the last time when I was a kid, but I kind of got away from it. So anyway, I didn't even know how this worked, but he kind of told me, he's like, oh, they pull a ball out and it's got the logo of the team that's going to win. So I started my first intention here was which team will win the draft lottery tonight. And again, I'm trying to play with this concept of time and remote viewing where, remote viewing is weird when it comes to time. So if you say things like tonight, that's better than saying, writing an actual date, or it can be, because sometimes you'll get it for the date some future year or whatever, right? So I use tonight, and that kind of scribbly thing you see there where it says S1, that's stage one, that's my ideogram. So I just kind of quickly bust out whatever my hand wants to do there.
So it's like automatic writing at this point.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what your stage one. And most people, when they're starting out, your ideogram is not going to be complicated like this. It's gonna be like, I've had my kids do this and stuff, and they'll just do a little squiggle, but sure enough, it'll have some relevance to the target. So in this case, I had kind of this convoluted thing or whatever. And off to the side, I wrote down jellyfish. So, because that was just this thought that I had in my head of a jellyfish, probably just from looking at the shape of it or whatever. So whenever you get a noun, something you can name, that's called analytical overlay. That's when your left brain is interjecting into the data stream and saying, hey, I think that stuff you're perceiving is boom, this. And sometimes it's completely right.
Something sometimes. It's
Yeah.
naming. Yeah.
It's naming it, yeah. And so as soon as you're naming it, you're not really doing your job. You're supposed to be perceiving this data and recording the data and not analyzing it, or at least not until later in the later steps of the process. So I got some colors. After my ideogram, I ended up drawing two just for good measure. Usually I like to draw two because if I see that they're at least somewhat consistent in the sort of shapes and flow of them, then I know I'm kind of actually connecting and getting the real data. So these scribbles are effectively my download of the session, and I just kind of set my pen on that scribble and I say to myself, okay, what am I sensing at this site? What kind of stuff am I getting here? So I got the color brown and gold and black, and it felt soft. I saw this kind of curving shape, no hard edges. It was very, that was clear. And this kind of, again, I wrote it over in the AOL side, but this feeling of sort of like an animal. So if you go to NHL2, that's where it continues. So from that data, I was like, okay, this isn't really giving me much. So I did what's called a move command, which is where you set another intention effectively. And I use the square brackets to show whenever I'm doing one of those. So I tried to get basically a little more specific on what I was after with this target. So I said, move to the first ball selected in tonight's draft lottery for NHL and describe the logo on the ball. So I drew another little ideogram there. And again, I got this AOL of like a grizzly bear, this sort of forest, indigenous
Second,
nature.
What does AOL mean?
Sorry, analytical overlay. So that's where your left brain is interjecting and naming stuff. So the second ideogram, if you look at it, you can kind of almost see the feathers in the logo there. and the sort of shape of the head. And so again, I got this kind of black green, this forest kind of feel. This I was seeing kind of all these flashes of like indigenous style artwork. And so my guess was, okay, it's going to be maybe the Chicago Blackhawks, because that was sort of the logo that's felt the most likely to be what I was interpreting here. And this is a very short remote viewing session. I did 2 pages. I got fairly high level data. I didn't break down any of my detailed stuff. I was just kind of playing here and seeing, okay, I'll see if I can answer my buddy's question with 10 minutes of work. And so I said, okay, so I'm thinking it's probably Chicago from the data that I've got. And so we waited, and the next day, sure enough, it was Chicago. So
very good.
You can use it for practical things to figure out stuff in the future. So I don't know if there was any betting that was going on the draft lottery or not, but
gamblers will gamble on anything.
Yeah, I mean, if there was, I missed it. So but yeah, so I thought that was kind of cool. And then at the same time, I was betting on the Stanley Cup final, because I'd run a session on that too, and I had gotten that the Colorado Avalanche would be defeated by the Seattle Kraken in the first round, so I nailed that. I actually made a few bucks on it, but then I didn't do any further remote viewing for the next stages, and I just kind of went on faith that the team I got in my initial session was going to win the whole thing, and that ended up not being the case. So I learned a lesson from that too. But yeah, so I mean, you can use it for practical things like that too. But yeah, I mean, the thing I really like doing is these future news sessions, and a lot of the time I'll get stuff that's kind of about the wars and the negative stuff that goes on in the world. But if you want to jump to our next example. Sure. I'll show you something cool here that happened on one of those sessions.
What am I looking at?
That would be number 12.
Wow. Okay.
So I had done this. This is actually like page 5 of a different session, but I had done this session, and I was getting all kinds of stuff about nuclear submarines and war and stuff. And I think what it ended up being was there was a nuclear icebreaker that was launched in Russia. It was like they were christening this new boat or whatever. So, but during the session, I kind of got frustrated. I was like, I don't want to do sessions about war. So I just wrote new category, and I did a new ideogram and everything else. And I just kind of went with it. It's like, okay, we'll move off of this topic that's bugging me. And so I got a much more kind of positive energy coming into this one from the get-go. So this feeling of awe and this kind of swirling energy, kind of water air element, all kind of coming into things, and a feeling of life, the color blue and white and black, this kind of misty, cold, flowing kind of vibe, but also this kind of element of like man-made, pointy, slick, something like a boat. And so over in the AOL column, I wrote, surfing, whales, the ocean, like all this this is the kind of stuff that I was kind of feeling about this new target. So if you jump to 13, that gives you page 2 of this session. So I this is my stage 3, where I just did my initial sketch, and I got this feeling of like a small boat, with sort of like a little thing over top. It was more of a flat bottom boat, this kind of shape with water. There was you can see the air bubbles there kind of coming out of the water. I thought, it's windy. There's something to do with wind. It sort of reminded me of a police boat, so I jotted that down. I got the sense that there was people, maybe animals. I was hearing whale noises and kind of sonar type sounds. And so I got this feeling of like, okay, like a search and rescue. It feels like it's stormy, or there's something kind of intense going on here, like a crash maybe. And then I had an AOL of the Kraken, so it's kind of funny. We were just talking about that too. So if you jump to page 3, number 14. So it kind of continued on this target from there. And so I did an intention here, move to the key element of the site, and drew a new ideogram as I do every time I do a move command. And I got this feeling of like a big life, but also a small life. So there was life. And if you look at the ideogram itself, there's 2 loops. There's a bigger loop within this kind of container, and then another smaller one. And the loop is sort of like an archetypal symbol for life, at least in remote viewing, or at least the way I learned it. So whenever I see a loop like that, I'm pretty quickly drawn to like, okay, there's something alive here. So I was having this feeling of like a ship in trouble at sea. And I thought maybe there's weather related storms or something because of this air and water element that I was getting. That there was rescues. I got this idea of Greenpeace, but also this kind of strong feeling about whales. So I kind of ended up drawing this whale kind of spontaneously and writing it off to the side. And again, this color blue and white. This
Yeah, I
sense
think I
of
see actually the center. I see. Is that a whale in the center?
Yeah, very poorly drawn whale.
No, but it's still, yeah. Well, I mean, it could have been a poorly drawn anything, so it was good. It looks like a whale.
Yeah. And then sometimes I like to just kind of dose out where in the world this target is. So I kind of drew a globe, and the first thing I was just like, okay, USA. Just that's what came to mind. And I kind of drew this this arrow, where it might be, from looking on a world map. So you might say that that's kind of in the ballpark of California, where that arrow would be, right? So that was kind of the gist of that one. And I was like, okay, that's good enough for this session. So I wrote EOS, end of session, wrote down the time I ended the session, and I kind of put it away off to the side. And then a couple days later, this is where we move to the whale image. This story came up on my news feed on social media, and as soon as I saw that little boat, I was like, oh, that's a blue and white boat with kind of an open back and a little thing on top. And I mean, it looks exactly like the one I sketched, right? And then there's these whales giving birth. So it was that feeling of, emergency or rescue or something, and awe-inspiring stuff. It's all in there, it was all kind of contained within the feedback of the target. So I was a little off. It wasn't a police boat or any kind of emergency situation. I mean, certainly for the whale and its mother, it was a medical situation and a big event for them. And I would imagine for anybody who was on this boat seeing this transpire. But also, if you read underneath, this was taken in Baja, California. So that's where this whaling boat was sort of doing its thing. So there was a lot of good stuff in that session that was kind of on point. And it's funny because, I went from doing this session about war and sketchy, less positive things, and just kind of said to my own subconscious, like, okay, let's do something else. Let's do something that's.
This is a great reason to just talk about this for a moment, because this was an example of taking control, in a sense, of the intention and bringing yourself into something that's more pleasant. I mean, you have choices, just like just like now, we're sitting around, we all have choices. We can do whatever we want to do.
Mhm.
What's your choice? And the answer is that. In your case, you said, I want to feel good.
Yeah,
Which shows that it's not.
I didn't want to run a target about war
Hey,
and domination and darkness. I wanted some good news, and sure enough, my subconscious delivered, and it was a really cool thing. I love whales. I love the ocean. I had a really cool experience off the coast of Boston last year, where we were heading out on a whale watching trip with my family. And we had kind of half an hour to kill on the way out. So I figured I'll do a meditation, and I'll kind of invite any whales that are out here in the water to come hang out with us, just so I sat for half an hour with that intention. And man, we saw over 100 breaches that day. The people on the boat, it was like a research vessel for the Boston Aquarium. The ecologists said that it was probably one of the best days they've ever had on that particular boat. So, I mean, I don't know if I can take credit for that or not, but
yeah, you should.
It certainly feels like I can.
Always take credit. Always take credit. Let people argue with you, but don't keep it to yourself. Take credit. Why not?
It was so cool, and it's funny. I've had so many little weird synchronicities around whales and nature with this whole remote viewing journey. Again, I mean, I'm an environmental engineer, so I'm kind of predisposed to. I come by my love of nature, honestly. But yeah, it's just such a fun adventure, and I'm now getting into teaching this to other people, and that's again, I'm right at the beginning of that journey, but it's already quite rewarding and enjoyable.
Yeah,
too.
in the description, I will have some information that people can look at if they want to get in contact with you. So we'll put that down there. And of course, I've been putting things up all day. Listen, we're just about out of time. I want to respect the fact that we had people don't know this, but we had a half hour before we could even start today trying to get this thing organized. Thank you
Technical difficulties.
Well, no, because it was very, very important for us to get that organized. It was because flow is so important. I appreciate the time and adding that on to the end. So that was really, really good of you. Do you have anything that you'd like to say at the end, or we're going to say goodbye? I don't know. Up to you.
Yeah, I mean, I just would ask anybody who's interested in this to explore it, because it's at least for me, it's been an incredibly beneficial thing in my life. As far as I had a lot of anxiety and depression and things when I was younger, and just this process of connecting to something higher than yourself. I come from this scientific background where that kind of stuff is frowned upon a lot of the time, and remote viewing is this kind of weird procedure that sort of exists at the intersection of science and the stuff we don't quite understand yet that we call magic. And there's that quote about sufficiently advanced science is magic to those who don't understand it, or whatever. But I think remote viewing really is a great tool for exploring that fine line, and looking at really what is human potential, what kind of stuff can we actually do. I'm not the only remote viewer out there by far, and I'm not the first nor the last, I'm sure. But there's thousands of people out there playing with this stuff and exploring this kind of edge of human capability. And I can't think of a more important time for people to start opening up to these kinds of ideas. Just look at how crazy everything is right now in the world. Being able to tap into that kind of still point and flow state, and explore whether it's the inner world of yourself that you're exploring, or the outer world, as we discussed. There's kind of different thoughts on that, and different intentions that you can do to do it too. But I think the more people that are going on a voyage like this, the better it's going to be for everybody moving forward. I really do think this is extremely important stuff for people to be paying attention to and thinking about. All
right, my friend. Thank you so much, Josh. This was great. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on, man.
All right, for the rest of you, thank you for watching and listening to the Timeless Voyager Series Podcast on video players like YouTube and audio players like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. One thing you can do to support the growth of Timeless Voyager is to hit that like button, share, comment. It really does help to keep the podcast on the internet so that I can keep producing content like the program you just watched and or listened to. Also, um, it's very important because the algorithms are triggered when you do those. For example, if you hit like or if you subscribe, it helps grow the channel. Remember, there is no obligation, and these actions are free. My name is Bruce Stephen Holmes, and I hope that your own personal voyage through life towards the development of your highest potential is a successful and joyous one.
See the light, see the light. The light exists where you don't see the light. Father, mother, sister, planets too. They all see the light and they follow you. Hear the light, hear the light. Thunder clapping in the dead of night. Father, mother, sister, planets too. They all hear the light and they follow you. Feel the light, feel the light, warm and tender, so we feel alright. Father, mother, sister, planets too.